Morning, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Expert, an award-winning daily series from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. to help small businesses. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments of the live feed, please. If you need any more advice, join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7 to help you. And during the live session, we'll be running a poll. So please do engage with that and I'll reveal the result at the end. So it's great to see you. My name is Clive Rich. I'm the founder and CEO of LawBite. And LawBite is a law tech company whose mission is to democratise the law for SMEs. My background is as a barrister and a digital executive at companies like Warner and Bertelsmann and Sony. And it occurred to me that if you could create a technology platform that would reach SMEs and give them law the way they actually want it, fast, affordable, and easy to use rather than slow, expensive, and complicated, which is what they're used to, then you might actually be doing something useful. And that's really the story of LawBite. So we know there's a massive market of SMEs who need a helping hand, 6 million of them in the UK, 400 million of them around the world. And what our technology does is it matches you to the right lawyer in terms of experience and expertise and availability. And it also provides a complete communication and workflow system. So you can do everything you want to in the digital space in real time with your lawyer. You can use our instant messaging app, which is a bit like WhatsApp for lawyers. You can upload documents, e-sign, share, comment, store. The whole case management is arranged for you and set out for you on your dashboard, so you can see all of that. You can see all your milestones. So you can do everything you need to with your lawyer in real time. And the net result of taking all that technology out of the supply chain, all that clutter, is that we save customers money. So we're normally 50% or less of the cost of equivalent lawyers. That doesn't mean we use lawyers who are no good. On the contrary, we use expert lawyers. They're all fully regulated and insured, and normally they have on average 15 years experience. And if you go on the website at lawbyte.co.uk, you'll see on the Meet the Lawyers page lawyers who are ex-Freshfields and Linklaters and Bird and Bird and lots of other firms you've probably heard of. So we cover everything from startup to exit for SME. We've got a very simple process. You can contact us via an inquiry form on the site or via live web chat on the site, or you can simply call us and we'll quickly arrange for a free call with the lawyer, and then you'll get a fixed price quote for your work. And if you're happy, you can accept that and all the work can go through the platform. We've got some terrific stats. We've now dealt with some 30,000 SME inquiries to date. About 70% of the business every month is repeat business, so it's very sticky. So sounds like people are enjoying LawBite and coming back for more. And we have a 98% customer approval rating on FIFO, which is the gold star system. I'm sure you'll know that you see when you are searching. So all going very nicely, thank you, and lovely to be able to talk to you this morning. And my topic really for this morning is the top 10 legal bear pits that all SMEs should avoid. And my experience of 30 years or so of being a lawyer, and the collective experience on LawBite of dealing with 30,000 SME inquiries, we've got used to spotting things that SMEs sometimes get wrong. So the things that sometimes go wrong are, first of all, SMEs simply not bothering with lawyers and contracts. They think it'll be quicker and cheaper if they do it on their own. So we did some research recently with the YouGov and the Centre for Economics and Business Research. We found that SMEs lose £13.6 billion a year from failure to address their legal needs. So that's not a small amount of money, and clearly a call to action there for SMEs So just pay more attention to this area, and definitely worth bothering with lawyers and contracts rather than trying to busk it. Quite often we find SMEs have not written things down as part of a written agreement. So they may have agreed things verbally with customers or suppliers, or they may have put things in an email chain which covers lots of other things at the same time and is sort of vague and a bit ambiguous, and not all the emails in the thread follow each other logically. Our experience of that is it's much harder to make the agreement enforceable against all of that confusing backdrop. So much better to write it down in a written contract. The corollary of that is not signing the contract. You'd be amazed how often people go to all the effort of actually getting a contract to agree, and then one or other of them hasn't actually signed or dated it, or both. Again, you can get by with that situation, and the courts might imply there's a contract in place anyway based on your conduct, but how much better to actually have a signed, executed agreement in your file that you can refer to if there's an argument or an uncertainty. The other thing that we've noticed SMEs do a lot is they don't monitor the ongoing obligations in a contract. So contracts can have all sorts of things that you need to do during the course of the contract. They might contain delivery commitments or minimum obligations, marketing commitments, payment obligations. You might need to get approvals or have approvals that you can give. There might be a renewal date that you've got to remember, or you might have to provide information updates or accountings. So what happens quite often is the SME agrees the contract and then puts it in a drawer and forgets about all that stuff. And then, of course, you can get yourself in trouble. You can miss an important date. Maybe the punishment is that you lose your exclusivity in the agreement, or worse still, you lose the agreement altogether and the other side terminates it. So that's an important thing. Intellectual property is another area that SMEs often ignore. So copyrights, design rights, trademarks, patents. About a third of Apple's $2 trillion valuation is made up of the value of its IP, principally its trademark. Okay, we're not all Apple, but that gives you an indication of the importance of IP to your business and identifying it and protecting it. And SMEs are often sitting on mountains of value that they didn't realize. And it's important you protect that. We can help you do that. Employment's an increasingly tricky area. It's easy to make mistakes. Payouts now for discrimination or unfair dismissal can be absolutely huge, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of pounds. It can be very costly. You need to be mindful of your consultant status as well, whether they're employees or not, and that's an area that's increasingly important to keep under review. Often SMEs ignore their legal problems. They bury their heads in the sand when demands or claims come in and try and ignore them. That's not a good strategy in my experience. Legal problems are a bit like weeds. They're much easier to control at the beginning of the period rather than when they're enormous. So much better to get to grips with a problem, seek out legal help, maybe try mediation, which is not costly or time consuming, and see if you can get things sorted out. Keep on the right side of HMRC. They're a necessary evil. Again, when people come at you with tax demands, those nasty brown envelopes, very easy to ignore all of that. My experience is that actually, if you talk to HMRC and explain what's going on, normally they're relatively reasonable. So much better to talk to them and see if you can get a payment regime sorted out or more time to pay than just ignoring them. And my last tip today would be to negotiate properly. It's amazing how many people don't have any methodology or strategy for negotiation. They just do it all by gut feeling. We did some research for a book I wrote on negotiation a few years ago, and we found that companies in the UK lose £17 billion a year from failure to negotiate properly. So an SME share of that could be quite extensive. Really important to understand the process of negotiation, the stages, which stage you're at, understand and be able to influence the attitudes on both sides, and be able to display the right behaviours on both sides of negotiation in order to get more of what you want from your deal making. So people who don't control attitude, process, or behaviour normally end up pretty disappointed with their outcomes on a regular basis. So there's some hopeful tips for you on things that frequently go wrong for SMEs. Hope that was helpful to you. And I'm available here to answer any questions. So someone's asked me straight away, hi Clive, you've worked with so many big global companies. What are the similarities or differences between businesses that are big versus small or medium ones? Well, not to state the obvious, but you know, big companies often have much more resource. They have much more staff and money to throw at problems, and so that can be very helpful, particularly actually when you're negotiating. Gives you some marketing power, and often just the power of numbers in a negotiation is very influential. If you've got 10 people in the negotiating room rather than just one, that does give you some extra bargaining power in the negotiation. So a sort of built-in advantage for bigger companies there. But of course, it comes with disadvantages as well. Big companies often very slow to react, often somewhat disorganized, difficult to get decisions because there are so many stakeholders, and sometimes they're a bit inconsistent in their decision making because somebody leaves, or there's a change in strategy, or a big change in business plan, or whatever it may be. So I think the advantage that SMEs have is that they're normally very agile, and they can make decisions very quickly and execute them very quickly, and they can therefore be more innovative than bigger companies that got less process to go through. So swings and roundabouts really, but those are some of the differences and between big companies and small ones. Lawbyte sounds like such a great service, says Ruby. I'll be checking it out. The businesses that reach out to you, what are the most common problems they come with? Well, I would say we get a lot of what I would call commercial issues around contracts, supply terms, terms of trade, website terms. We get a lot of corporate issues around shareholdings or partnerships or investment. We do get a lot of employment and consulting issues. That I think that's particularly been the case during COVID. People had a lot of headaches to try and deal with it during that period. A lot of IP, as I mentioned earlier, intellectual property, such an important asset to your business, and quite a lot of disputes. Unfortunately, SMEs very good at falling out with each other, and these things can be very stressful for them, very costly. So I think people enjoy having a lawyer in their corner just to walk them through all of that. So we've had a message on from Sammy. Brexit obviously caused a lot of legal implications for importers and exporters. Now the rules have been in place for a few months. How do you think businesses are coping? Was it as bad as some feared, or is it all right? Well, I think you only have to read some of the press to realise that this is an ongoing problem. So we all know that the government's intention was to open up overseas markets outside the EU and restore Britain's sovereignty through Brexit. But of course, that's come at a bit of a price, because now dealing with the EU involves all sorts of rules and regulations and costs that weren't there before. So I think there are problems around importing and exporting. all the extra customs declarations, rules of origin, licensing forms that you have to get. All that's caused a lot of red tape, lots of problems, in particular for the food industry, but all exporting companies really, and importers. There's some problems around movement of workers, as you'd expect. So no longer can we just have EU workers come to the UK, and we can't go and work there. So the process around getting clearance, the government's new point system for clearing EU nationals can work in the UK, is very complicated, very time consuming, and quite costly. There are some needless complications around intellectual property, because you've now got two regimes. So for things like trademarks, you used to be able to have one community trademark. Now you have you need to have a trademark for the UK and another trademark for the rest of the EU. That's a needless complication, and I suspect there may be some issues imminently around GDPR, around data. The EU is just about to opine on whether the UK can be treated as effectively the same jurisdiction as the EU, the rest of the EU, for data purposes. So watch this space. So I don't think it's been easy. I'm not sure it's going to get easier quicker, unfortunately. Hugh on Facebook Messenger: negotiation is such an important part of developing a contracted working relationship. What's your advice if things go sour during negotiations? Can you get it back on track, or is it sometimes best to cut losses? Well, I think when things go wrong in a negotiation, what you need to do is try and change the climate in the negotiation. So if people aren't trusting each other, or a bad temper has broken out, you need to try and change the climate, reset the climate, so you get yourself on a much more positive footing. Often, in order to do that, it's a good idea to take a break. So if you're in a meeting that's gone wrong, really good idea to just say, do you know what, I think we should just have a 10-minute break and regroup. After that, gather our thoughts and energy and come back and have a good go at solving this. Often just the mere fact of taking a break calms everybody down, and the break could be longer than that. You could say, look, let's come back and have another go at that next week, when everybody's had a chance to do a bit more research. So taking a break, I think, is often a really good way of lowering the temperature. And sometimes you just need to change the pattern of the negotiation. So change the room in which you're negotiating, change the time of day in which you're negotiating, change the venue, maybe change the people. Sometimes it's the people that are the problem, and the personalities just aren't gelling. So change the people, or just check. I mentioned earlier attitude, process of behaviour. Just have a think about, am I bringing the right attitude to negotiation? Are they? Do we need to do anything to try and shift that? And am I bringing the right behaviour to the negotiation? We all tend to have favourites that we rely on all the time. But of course, there are 7 billion people in the world, and they're all different. And so it stands to reason that you probably need to be able to adapt your behaviour to suit the energy of the person in the room with you. And so be prepared to be flexible on your behaviour. So there's some initial thoughts around negotiation. And I've got a question here about intellectual property. So you mentioned how important it can be and how it can add value. I'm not sure I understand fully how it works and what it looks like in practice. So there are basically 4 types of intellectual property. And intellectual property really represents the value of your creativity. So you can use that value to make money by exploiting or licensing or selling your IP. You can use it to get investment, because investors love IP, and if you go and sell your company, having IP will definitely help you with your valuation. So copyright literally gives you the right to prevent other people copying your IP. So copyright can apply to things like documents, books, photos, music, films, methodologies, tables, databases. So copyright's a very useful source of IP. Trademarks are a sort of badge that distinguishes your goods from someone else's, and means that if you have a trademark, right, it means that no one else can use your trademark instead of you, or try and leech off your reputation by using your trademarks. That's a very useful form of protection. Trademarks are normally very easy to get, not very expensive, and you could get a 10-year renewable right if you register for a trademark. So very valuable form of protection. You can trademark everything from a name to a logo to a number. So Nike's obviously a big trademark. Adidas, Coke, 007 is a trademark. You can even trademark a smell, believe it or not. The smell of beers being trademarked in connection with the sale of a particular kind of dart. So a very, very useful mechanic. Design rights protect your 3D or 2D designs, the look and feel of something, its shape, its texture, its contours, its ornamentation. That's a very cheap and easy right to get. And patents protect your scientific inventions if they're new and original. A bit harder to get patents, not possible normally in the UK to get them for software, which is a shame, but nonetheless they can be very valuable if you can get them, and also worth having. So quite a mixed bag on intellectual property. Definitely worth checking it out with a lawyer. We do intellectual property health checks, help you identify what you've got and what you can do with it, and that's all for free. So Arjun on Facebook Messenger. 6 months before coronavirus, my company signed a 5-year lease on our office space. Now we're basically all digital. Most of my employees don't really want to go back to the office. What's the best way to approach shortening or getting out of the lease? Well, this is tricky. Most leases don't have what's called a force majeure clause, which is where the circumstances of the world around you change to such an extent that you can just get out of the obligations concerned. So it might be worth negotiating, because landlords all over the place are finding that tenants are leaving tenanted space. It might be the lease comes to an end and isn't renewed, or people give notice under the lease. So worth negotiating, because the landlord may be prepared to lower the rent in order to keep you. So that's one thing that's worth doing. Worth checking out also if there's a break clause in the lease. Sometimes, even though the lease might be 5 years, there's an opportunity to get out the lease early after 1 or 2 years. It's called a break clause. Worth having a look at that in case that's the case. What's the biggest deal you ever negotiated, Clive, or the one you are most proud of? Well, you might, if anyone's bothered to look up my background, you'll see that among other things, I ran the business side of Simon Cowell's TV divisions for a number of years, which is very interesting. Is when he was setting up X Factor and Got Talent. So I don't know if it's the biggest deal I've ever done, but probably the most interesting was taking Simon to America, and with Got Talent, and with Pop Idol, American Idol, as it's called over there, and negotiating a contract for Simon's appearances and the licensing of the show for the US. Very interesting. Necessitated a period of time in Hollywood, which is a very strange place, and certainly all good experience, and quite jolly as well. I have about 7 or 8 pieces of legal work a year that I get my solicitor to look over. but I worry it may not be as cost effective as just hiring someone in-house. How much legal work should we have to hire directly? Well, that's quite a difficult question to answer, because it's not just to do with the amounts of work, it's to do with the complexity of the work and how regularly it comes in, and also the value to the business. So we routinely do work for people who have at least 8 pieces of work a year. In fact, that's the average for an SME, to have 8 legal pieces of work a year that need doing. And one thing we do to encourage that work to come to us is we operate subscription products, where you can pay a monthly amount and then you get credits to use under your subscription, and you get a sort of discounted rate because you've become a subscriber. And many SMEs find that's a very cost-effective way of dealing with their legal needs, more cost-effective than hiring a body, a permanent person in-house. So it might be worth sort of checking out a product like that. You did deals for a few record deals, labels and media companies, said Ellie. Have you ever worked with someone you were a bit starstruck to meet, and how did you keep your cool? Well, good question. I mean, I suppose I have met quite a lot of famous people over the years, recording artists and the like. Actually, my experience of dealing with them is that they're normally not that different from you and I. They just have a uber talent in one particular area, and often that's accompanied by a deficit in other areas. So they may be brilliant at songwriting, but actually rather shy, or some other discrepancy. So I tend to get not too starstruck by meeting famous people, because underneath whatever they're famous for is normally a fairly ordinary person who has exactly the same anxieties and problems as you and I do, but probably just a bit more money to deal with them. What are the biggest legal risks to a business if they aren't as data stable as they should be? And well, as I'm sure all of you knew, that a new regime came into the UK with GDPR in 2018, which is the regime under which personal data gets handled. And there's a whole set of obligations that goes with GDPR, and in terms of how you collect data, the consents you need, how you store data, the access you give to someone whose data you've stored and their right to delete it, and what you must do if there's a breach of your data obligations. And in the UK, that regime is run by the Information Commissioner and the ICO, and there are equivalent regimes in the EU as well. The problem, if you get it wrong, is that you can face very, very big fines, up to 10% of your turnover if it's a really flagrant breach, and then obviously restrictions on your business going forward. So it's not easy to be data compliant under GDPR. Definitely an area where advice is needed. We offer GDPR products to help you work your way through that. It's worth taking the effort to be on the right side of that issue, because if you're on the wrong side and you have a data breach or you get reported to the ICO, there's a world of pain there for you. So I believe the poll results are in. So we asked you, when getting legal advice for your business, do you ever find it complicated or costly? And 100% of you said sometimes. So I'm not surprised to hear that. Our experience is, and we've done research on the subject, that less than 10% of SMEs actually think that their lawyers give them value for money. So that's the reason why we do what we do, and try and give SMEs expert legal advice that's half the price of what they would normally pay for the equivalent lawyers. So I think we're coming to the end of our session this morning. So if you want to contact LawBite, you can go to lawbite.co.uk. We normally get a lawyer in front of you within 2 hours of you making your inquiry. Everyone gets a free call when they contact us, so no obligation. The clock's not ticking as soon as you start, and be great to see you there. So thank you for tuning in this morning. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email on clive@lawbite.co.uk. Coming up on Ask the Expert on Monday is Aaron Patrick, an accountant and QuickBooks expert. So tune into him. You can get advice on accounting and the latest features and tools that will make your bookkeeping easier. Very important part of being an SME. A reminder that if you need any more advice, you can join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand for you 24/7. I've really enjoyed answering your questions this morning. I hope my input was helpful. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.